The United Nations General Assembly has unanimously appointed former Portuguese Prime Minister Antonio Guterres as the next UN Secretary General. He will serve as the 9th Secretary General of the world body for the 5 years beginning January of next year. Antonio Guterres, 67, will replace Ban Ki-moon, 72, of South Korea. Ban Ki-moon will step down at the end of 2016 after serving 2 terms. The 15-member UN Security Council last week unanimously recommended that the General Assembly appoint Guterres. He beat out 12 other candidates, 7 of whom were women, amid a push for the first woman to be elected. Guterres was Portugal's Prime Minister from 1995 to 2002 and the UN High Commissioner for Refugees from 2005 through to 2015.
I have the honor to announce that His Excellency Antonio Guterres has been appointed by acclamation Secretary General of the United Nations for a term of office from 1st January 2017 to 31st December 2021.
Get more details from CCTV's Lorna Shadik. She's keeping tabs on this story from the UN headquarters in New York. Lorna, it's about a week now since it became clear that Antonio Guterres would be the next UN Secretary General. What is the significance of today's events, though? What transpired during that session at the General Assembly?
Well, this session today was the culmination of really a months-long process to try and find a successor to Ban Ki-moon, which began actually in the General Assembly with question and answer sessions and town hall sessions by members of the General Assembly themselves, but also civil society groups who were able to ask all of the 13 original candidates for the post of Secretary General questions. That was quite unprecedented in terms of its transparency and accountability, but the process then moved on into the Security Council, as is traditional, and they held a series of 6 straw polls over the course of this summer to try and determine informally which of the candidates had the most support among Security Council members. And at the end of that long process, it appeared last week after the 6th straw poll that indeed Antonio Guterres was the candidate with the most backing from the biggest number of Security Council members, and they unanimously eventually elected him as the person whose name would go forward to the General Assembly for a vote today. And that is what has just happened. 193 members voted Mr. Guterres by acclamation as the new Secretary General designate who will take over from Ban Ki-moon on the 1st of January 2017.
Well, Guterres will not be taking office, as you mentioned, until January the 17th. But what happens, though, between now and then?
Well, there's several things that need to happen. First of all, the sort of next key date is the 19th of October, when Mr. Guterres will again be speaking to the General Assembly, and that will be their opportunity to give him a list of the priorities they would like him to address once he takes office. But aside from that, really the most important thing, and the thing that diplomats here will be watching most closely, is the appointment of his staff, some of the biggest and most important positions at the UN, which are now in his gift. For example, the heads of things like the Peacekeeping Department or the Department of Political Affairs. Those are appointments that only Antonio Guterres himself as Secretary General can make, and it is quite likely that as part of the behind-the-scenes negotiation process for him to be getting the job in the first place, it's possible that he will have promised some of those key appointments to certain countries. We know, for example, that Russia certainly wants more representation at a high level, particularly in the Department of Political Affairs. China has made it known that it would be keen to have more involvement in the Peacekeeping Department, for example, which is currently run by a Frenchman, Hervé Ladsou. So that kind of thing, we'll be seeing changes in those departments over the next few months or so. Some of those appointments won't happen until after Mr. Guterres has taken office. Some of them may take place beforehand, but a lot of that will be taking place over the next couple of months. Aside from that, really, he'll have to be briefed on all of the many crises that the UN is dealing with. Of course, we know he has experience because he was once head of the UNHCR, the High Commission for Refugees, but nonetheless, a lot of different world issues to get to grips with, not least the issues in the DPRK, Ukraine, and of course, Syria.
Right, Lorna Shadik for us there in New York. So what does this mean for Africa? Let's discuss this further with Yolanda Spies, a senior research fellow at the University of Johannesburg and chair of the African Diplomacy and Foreign Policy. She's standing by for us in Johannesburg. Well, Yolanda, Antonio Guterres has now been formally appointed UN Secretary General. What should Africa, though, expect from this leadership once he assumes office on January the 17th?
Our continent is very fortunate to have him accept this position as the most senior diplomat in the world. Mr. Guterres has had a long journey with Africa, first in his 2 terms as Prime Minister of Portugal, and as you know, Portugal has a former colonial history with Africa that goes back much longer than any other. But then specifically in his 10 years as the UN High Commissioner for Refugees, in which he traveled widely in Africa, made the case for more resources and attention to be given to hotspots in Africa, such as the Great Lakes area and the Central African Republic. And he speaks several languages that are used as international official languages in Africa: Spanish, Portuguese, his native language, French and English. But I just think his track record in transforming the United Nations High Commission on Refugees, that in itself says to Africa he's going to be a decisive leader, he is going to be transformative, and he really knows his business.
Decisive and transformative. So in your view, Yolanda, in your view, what are the key issues Antonio Guterres will need to prioritize when he does take over?
When he takes over, he does so at a crucial time in the history of the United Nations. His predecessor, who is the incumbent Mr. Ban Ki-moon, has presided over an intensifying crisis in the Middle East, the greatest humanitarian crisis since the Second World War. And this is what Mr. Guterres is stepping into. But I think even more compelling than that is that there is, at this stage, the lowest point ever in the relationship between the 2 superpowers of the world, the lowest point since the Cold War between the United States and Russia. And I think he is going to have to use all his skills as a mediator and as a top diplomat to ensure that those 2 powers don't actually come to blows with each other.
Right, Yolanda Spies, she's joining us there from Johannesburg.